So I want to talk about development through intimate industries today, and as Chris said, my name is Dr. Julia Meszaros, and welcome and thank you for coming. All right, today I will be speaking about romance tourism, which has been commonly referred to as the mail-order bride industry. In this talk, however, I will be exploring the ways in which romance tourism represents an important form of economic development in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the former Soviet Union, as well as the United States and other Western countries, that is often ignored by economic theorists. So what is romance tourism? A lot of people think it's sex tourism, but it's actually different. And they purposefully market themselves as being very different and marriage-oriented. This is about dating, matchmaking, and if sex occurs, that's okay, but it's not a guarantee. And on the website, they tell you if you're looking for a sex tour, there are plenty of other places to go. This is for serious people who are looking for marriage. And so while a lot of other internet dating sites, especially domestic dating sites like Match.com and OkCupid, have been kind of stagnant in their business, the business for romance tourism has been steadily increasing over the years. And most folks start by going to a website. And the website for the company that I followed is loveme.com, and normally I would show that to you, but we have some technical issues. So on loveme.com, there are literally thousands of women's profiles, and a man will join the website and have access to email all of these women. Now, the emails cost between $7 to $10 one way. So if you add photos, that raises the price. And then for every response, that's another $7 to $10. So when I was actually on tour, I met quite a few guys who had literally spent $5,000, $10,000 on just email exchanges alone before they even got to the country that they were going to. And Anesthesia Date is the main competitor of A Foreign Affair, and they get about 2.6 million visitors a month on the website alone. And so this is a large business that's growing. But the prime part I'm focusing on is the tours. And the tours are comprised of the socials. And this is a photo of a social in the Philippines. And in Ukraine, the socials are large parties. They're at nightclubs. They serve free champagne for the women. And the men, take a bottle of champagne and introduce themselves to the women. But in Colombia and Ukraine, it's kind of like speed dating on crack. So there's one guy at a table and 10 women, and the guys move to each table and meet every single woman in the room, and then they do it again the next night with a different set of women. And so AFA, their main draw is we can introduce you literally to hundreds of women within a short period of time. And then if you don't meet any women you're interested in at the actual parties, you can go into the local AFA office, literally flip through binders of women's profiles, and look for a date. And the office will call the woman. She has the ability to say no. And there are a lot of women who do say no to dates with certain men, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, so the women have a right to say no. But overall, right, there is this opportunity for men to meet a lot of women, and the company says, we're not, selling women, we're selling you access. And so they're selling the access to these women, but they aren't even providing matchmaking services, right? It's not like you go in and you're like, I'm really into tennis and academia, and then they're gonna find a woman who's also into tennis and academia. They kind of let you go for it on your own. So the methods I used to kind of explore romance tourism, how I actually gained entree into the industry was that they had a seminar for men in Fort Lauderdale. I was doing my PhD in Miami at the time, and so I went to Fort Lauderdale, met the owner of the company, and he is very, very open to media coming and participating in tours, as well as scholars. And so he told me, wherever you want to go, you're welcome. You just let me know and we'll set you up. So I was able to do participant observation of 3 romance tours, one in Colombia, one in Ukraine, and one in the Philippines. The one in Ukraine was about 2 weeks long, whereas the ones in Colombia and the Philippines were a little shorter. They were a week long. And then I would stay on for additional weeks in order to interview women. But I was pretty much, during the tour, embedded in the tour. So in Ukraine, the tour goes to 3 cities. And so I'm on the bus with 50 guys, right, on a 4-hour bus ride in the middle of nowhere, Ukraine. And this was the perfect time to get interviews, right? I got you trapped. Talk to me. And actually, I found the most enlightening interviews were actually from local employees. Local employees tended to give me the real deal and kind of had a more longitudinal view of the industry, of who comes on a regular basis, what kind of women are popular, and all of these things. I did receive informed consent from all of my participants, verbal. And I'm also kind of employing discourse analysis when I look at my interviews, when I look at my observations, and when I look at the websites and different guidebooks that have been written about how to find a foreign bride, right? And I consider that all discourse, and I analyze it in terms of various inequalities. Okay, here we go. So A Foreign Affair is the company that I followed, and that is John Adams and his Russian wife, Tanya Adams. They are the public face of A Foreign Affair. John Adams and 2 of his friends, Ken and William A.G., went to Russia on a romance tour, and all married Russian women, and they came up with this great idea. Let's start a company to do this. That's where A Foreign Affair is born out of. So they are based out of Phoenix, Arizona, so they are completely compliant with American laws and regulations about international marriage brokers. There was a law passed in 2005 to protect women who have married American men and are migrating. It's called the International Marriage Broker Regulation Act, and they are totally compliant with that. And as I pointed out, they are very open to the press. And what they do is not actually matchmaking, they're actually facilitating people meeting, and they don't actually really get involved on the ground with the couples. And in fact, they encourage men to date a lot of women on these tours. So they will tell you, oh, if you meet a girl at the very first social and you really like her, still go to the other socials, still go on dates with other women. You don't want to put all of your eggs into one basket. You came all this way, you paid all of this money. You should really be looking for as many opportunities as you can have. And so, in a sense, right, their business is to encourage marriage, but to a degree, then you wouldn't have return business. So you don't want everybody to get married, right? You want people to continue to come on your tours. Now, normally I would have shown a short clip on Nightline that follows an AFA tour in Odessa, Ukraine, and follows a guy named Bob. And, you know, they show Bob, and I was going to use Bob as a person to highlight various aspects of the tour industry. And he has given me his express permission to use his likeness and his name. The rest of the names in the presentation are going to be pseudonyms. All right, so the men attending tours. Bob is your typical tour attendant. He is over 50, he's white, he is professional, he has, you know, a professional degree. Most of the guys are from small towns, a lot of them are from rural areas, a lot of guys from Texas, a lot of guys from the Midwest. They feel that they can't meet women in their age group in their local area. A lot of them are divorced, and most of them are earning over $100,000. And and most of them actually identify as politically conservative. However, of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. I have met a couple African American men on tour in Ukraine. In Colombia, there were quite a few Latino men who had an advantage because they actually spoke Spanish and could interact with the local women better than the gringos. And but in general, right, and I've met, you know, guys who were in their early 30s. I met a young man who went on a tour at 18 and married his wife, and they have a child, and they just left the Philippines after living there in the Philippines. He moved to the Philippines for her for 4 years. That is the unusual case. That is not your typical case. Most of the time, they are older gentlemen. So why romance tourism? Why are all these older, white, affluent men looking for foreign brides? And I take this quote from Bob, and he says, I think there's a notion, part of the problem is, in part, there's feminism, right? So it all comes back to feminism. Look, I believe in equal rights. My God, do I believe in equal rights? Totally. I paid for my daughter to get a degree in women's studies. A woman should be paid to get exactly the same rights as a man. There should be no difference whatsoever. That's ridiculous because of your reproductive system. So I believe in that. But at the same time, there's a certain aspect of feminism that, pardon me, is like, okay, you don't need a man? Sorry, and what am I supposed to do? Buy a dog? And so, so Bob thinks, you know, he has a daughter, she's about my age, she has a master's in women's studies, you know, he thinks he's for equal rights, but he thinks that feminism has gone too far and has pushed men towards being more effeminized and women as more masculine. And this was a common theme that I heard not just from Bob. And so I argue that because of this escape that American men have because of their privilege and whiteness, that they are escaping these expectations of egalitarian, equal relationships here in the West, right? And so I situate this in terms of Giddens, who talks about how heterosexual relationships are moving to this more pure, democratic, egalitarian situation, where we have a social relation that is entered into for its own sake. It's not based off of money. What can you do for me? I like you, you like me, we're gonna hang out, and once we're sick of each other, we're gonna part ways, right? And so in that way, we have this idea that relationships are evolving towards a more democratic and egalitarian footing. However, numerous feminist theorists and family sociology of the family theorists have showed that heterosexual relationships, even in the West, are still unequal, right? Hochschild talks about women often having to work the second shift when they come home, that men haven't picked up the pace with reproductive labor, and that oftentimes if women aren't willing to do the second shift, that you will outsource it to migrant women and hire nannies and domestics and maids. Or, as some folks who have studied this industry have pointed out, that you outsource this work to a foreign wife. And while Giddens was arguing that we're moving towards more equality in heterosexual relationships, he didn't deal with this crisis in masculinity that we've been seeing, especially in white masculinity with all these mass shootings, right? We have Jennifer Carlson, Michael Kimmel, talking about how the crisis in white working class masculinity is increasing participation in hate groups, is increasing gun usage and violence. And so a lot of folks have been focused on the downwardly mobile white man and his response to his feeling of victimization. However, even middle-class white men are feeling victimized, and they're feeling victimized by feminist expectations for an equal relationship. And so a lot of the guys who I interviewed are looking for what I call the emotional labor of selflessness. And so they are actively seeking out unequal relationships in the romance tour industry. And the emotional labor of selflessness is more than just reproductive labor. It's more than cooking and cleaning. It's molding both yourself and your aspirations to that of your husband. You shouldn't have a career because your focus should be pleasing him. Hello? He came and rescued you, now you should be there to please him, is how a lot of these guys feel. In addition, right, you have to maintain a beautiful and sexy appearance. And in this way, grooming and self-care becomes a labor of love, and it's not just for the woman to feel beautiful, but it's to give the man more self-esteem, like, hey, I have a hot wife. She's young, isn't she beautiful? And so a lot of guys look at what they want in a woman, this emotional labor of selflessness, and kind of relate it to this idea of a 1950s white middle class version of femininity, right? And they're June cleavers, right? But sexualized June cleavers, I mean, okay. This is from Bob talking about Ukrainian June cleavers. I know, I mean, it's just, they have this blonde, blue-eyed, they dress to kill, and they're just so ladylike. I tell you what, it's a lot like dating June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver. I can see them wearing pearls, making borscht with an apron in the kitchen. They really value that. And so there's this idea that Ukrainian women, while they're sexual and beautiful, are also comfortable in the kitchen in an apron and pearls, right? But it's also not just Ukrainian women. The same kind of discourse is used to describe Filipino women as well as Colombian women. According to Derek, a 52-year-old divorced entrepreneur on tour in the Philippines, women in the Philippines resemble June Cleaver more than contemporary white American women do, right? So Filipino women are more like American women in the 1950s. They don't have to go out and make a living or a career. They're happy to stay at home, working the family living. Personally, I think that's a big problem in America. But of course, he also had an 18-year-old daughter, and when I asked him what he wanted his daughter to do, he didn't want his daughter to stay at home, right? He wanted her to go get an education and live this independent life. But he wanted that for himself. And he also said, I hate to use the word traditional lady, but I guess more or less that's what it seems like, that Filipinas are more traditional. And once again, these highly sexualized images are, you know, married to this discourse of traditional femininity in these weird and unique and complex ways. All right, so men like Bob use their whiteness as social capital abroad to meet potential wives. In Ukraine, Colombia, and the Philippines, many of the women I interviewed specified that they were searching for a white American man. I argue that for women in the romance tour industry, desiring a white American husband is an aspiration for the American consumer lifestyle. And so that's why I have this picture of a white woman with, you know, a fancy car, because whiteness itself is used to sell luxury on a capitalist market, right? And so a lot of the men in the tour industry use their economic and racial privileges to escape the egalitarian expectations for heterosexual relationships here in the US. And so their whiteness becomes a kind of currency when they go abroad. And for a lot of women in the global South, whiteness represents this aspirational lifestyle that is about consumption, modernity, right? And in this way, I argue that whiteness itself is affectively constructed, right? And as Saraswati argues, feelings are where the structural and the individual collide. And so how we feel about people, how we give emotion to these kinds of images spreads globally. And Schaefer, who also studied the romance tourism industry, argued that women are desiring to move from producers in the global economy to consumers in the global economy. All right, so I use Alperdurai's idea of imagination as a staging ground for action in discussing the ways in which women in all three research sites actively imagine American men as financially stable white men that can provide them with a modern consumer lifestyle. All right, this is a quote from Jessie, who worked as a translator in Colombia. And she said that most women want to date Brad Pitt, right? The women who come enjoying the romance tour agency, they're imagining Brad Pitt. They're imagining young, attractive, affluent, fair-skinned, but that's obviously not what they find, right? So they're expecting look-wise white men who are in their 20s or 30s or in their 40s. There's a lot in their 40s, but the younger ones want a guy under 40, white guy, stable, financially stable. Oh yeah, and the financially stable part is really important because most of them are not stable. Most of them are living in the favelas. They also call the rough neighborhoods. They've used the Brazilian word for favela in Colombia as well. Most of them are middle to lower class. They don't earn that much money. A lot of single mothers. And a really, really small amount of them are professionals or in college working as lawyers and dentists. But usually the girls are middle to lower class. They work in factories or as secretaries. So they want someone that's financially stable. So a lot of the women are willing to forego a very young or good-looking man if he can provide some sort of financial stability and move her towards this aspirational lifestyle of consumerism. And so once again, whiteness was imagined in this ideas about stability and consumption. If Nadine, a 24-year-old translator in Ukraine who was briefly engaged to an American guy, wrote, "If I marry an American, he must have money. Why would I leave my home country, my language, my friends, and my family to go be poor somewhere else?" Good question, right? Also, I'm more attracted to American people because they are tall, they are white, they have nice eyes, nice nose, blue eyes. I really like it. Blue eyes and nice nose, not like mine. Missy, a 22-year-old profile in the Philippines. And so for a lot of women, white men, their facial features, the whiteness became associated with financial stability and being able to move to this modern consumer lifestyle. But now, obviously we know not all Americans are white. And so a lot of the women would talk about, when I asked them, well, what about a non-white American man? What would you say to dating someone like that? And these are the responses I would get. So Elena, 23 in Colombia, told me, I'm not a racist or anything, but I don't want to date someone darker than me. Riley, 26-year-old employee in the Philippines, and she also was a profile on the website, told me, and this black man, dark as chocolate, wanted me to sleep with him on the first night. I would rather date a fat man than a black man. This is not my type of guy. And then finally, Julissa, who worked as a translator in Ukraine, told me she dealt with this African-American man who couldn't find a date. So she said, that's where my communication with Jamal starts. Girls refused to come on a date with him because he was black. Yeah, because here it's still like, oh, he's Afro-American, oh, he's black. No, I can't. And so for a lot of the women, blackness doesn't equate with that same aspirational lifestyle, even if they are American. And so this, I think, shows that oftentimes race even trumps ideas about nationality and class. All right, but don't feel bad. Our American men also articulate very clearly racialized preferences by even just choosing certain regions to attend tours versus others. You don't see many romance tours in the Middle East. There aren't that big in Africa either yet. And Bob continually returns to Ukraine. When I ask him, after going to 9 tours, why don't you try out a different location, right? Why don't you go to the Philippines? Why don't you go to Colombia? And he tells me he just loves Ukrainian women too much. However, he discusses his preference for Ukrainian women in terms of personal taste and preference, and also other men talk about it as personal taste and preference, like, oh, that's just what I'm attracted to, and not implying that there's any political or racial undertone in who you're attracted to, right? So Bob said to me, I think you have to have, you've already been to Latin America, so it has to be your taste, or an Asian woman, it has to be your taste. You're going to the Philippines, you'll see. Alec, who I met on tour on the bus in Ukraine, told me, I mean, countries around the world that AFA goes, like the Philippines, South America, I wasn't interested in going there. I'm not attracted to those women. I am more into the Slavic and Swedish look. Very fair, light eyes, light hair. So for a lot of the guys, they were looking for blonde, tall, supermodel, stereotypical Ukrainian women. However, obviously, that doesn't always happen. So Ukraine is actually the most popular tour location out of everywhere. They have the most tours, the most men attending. And so most men actually begin their whole journey into the romance tour industry in Ukraine, and then move towards more exotic locations if that doesn't really work out for them. So for this reason, I argue that these men are searching for what I call the exotic light. Thus, when men travel to Latin America and the Caribbean, they tend to search for mixed-looking women like Sofia Vergara and tend to avoid Afro and indigenous Colombian women. So as Kyle, who is actually a liberal guy, very educated from Georgia, said to me, anyway, I really didn't know much about Latin women, and I guess I sort of misjudged South America, like many Americans do. They think it's kind of like Mexico, but actually this whole area, once you get past Mexico, most of Central America, where the Aztec Indian influence was, and you have the real dark-skinned people, pause. But actually South America has a lot of German influence and Italian and a lot of Spanish, where it's really European. It's like Europeans that speak Spanish. All right, and so this was Kyle, and mind you, he's a liberal, open-minded guy, and he's talking this way about indigeneity and blackness. However, in a place like Colombia, which is associated with blackness in Africa, dark skin was definitely avoided. On the other hand, in the Philippines, which is far from ideas of blackness in Africa, right? People wanted more exotic. They wanted the most exotic women. But since Asia has already been positioned closer to whiteness than many other regions in the world, and Asian women's petite frames and conservative family values actually make them a highly desired minority even within the American dating markets. And if you look at recent data that's been released from OkCupid, and the dating site At Your Interest, Asian women have the most responses, far more than white women, far more than black women or Latino women. So in the Philippines, the gentlemen were actually looking for darker skinned women and women with more stereotypical Asian features such as slanted eyes. According to Halia, who is the owner of an affiliate office in the Philippines, the American men, in fact, I have one guy who is like, Halia, I want to meet somebody really exotic. I want her more darker because I don't want to bring somebody back there who is of the same color, our color, in another country. And he wants the girl to have a little rounded nose, flat nose or little rounded nose. I can't imagine what people want. Another guy came here and said, I want somebody who's chinita. Look for someone with slanted eyes. And so the guys make clear racial preferences as well as the women, and different ideas of darkness apply depending on what country you are in. So thus, while many men presented their, sorry, I'm just not used to PCs anymore. Okay, so once again, they are presenting this as their own personal taste and preference without recognizing the serious ways in which racist undertones are coming out of this kind of discourse. All right, intimate industries like a foreign affair provide an economic avenue of development for not just the owners of the company here in Arizona, and trust me, they are millionaires, and they have made quite a bit of money. However, it's also an important stream of revenue for places like Ukraine, Colombia, and the Philippines. especially in Ukraine. Ukraine has been going through a major political situation recently with Putin and everything, and instead of the tour industry going down, it has actually gone up and become even more money and more men going right now than it was even 3 years ago. And so the tours provide this important stream of income, and intimate industries run in this spectrum, right? Anything from sex labor to working at a call center to being a nurse, right? Wherever you're providing intimate moments and care. But it's also an important site of economic development, and we often don't think of sex labor and romance tourism, right, as an important site of development. And I think it's even more important of a site of development abroad, even though more of the money is actually coming to the US, of course, to these individual companies. I will show how the women use this industry as an income generating activity. So the industry itself is a multi-million-dollar industry. As I mentioned, the email exchanges provide thousands of dollars already. Most men don't actually attend tours. According to AFA, only about 3% of men ever get up the guts to actually go there. Most of them will just continue correspondence. And the industry is actually set up much like many other capitalist industries, right? AFA doesn't do everything. They outsource a lot of the labor to affiliate offices. So AFA actually works with over 100 affiliate offices in all the various countries that they go to. The affiliate offices do most of the recruiting. They're the ones who vet the women, include the women, and sign them up online. And then AFA and the affiliate will split the profit 50-50 for all the emails from the affiliate offices that come in. Some of the affiliate offices actually run the tours in the smaller places. A small town called Sumy in Ukraine the tour there was run by an affiliate office. And then all the tours in the Philippines are run by affiliate offices. And so this outsourcing and pushing away the blame. So if there are problems, right, AFA can say, well, you know, we work with all these affiliate offices, there's no way we can control what they're doing, we apologize. And there's a lot of way to also outsource blame and problems, right? And it also allows entrepreneurial people like Bob to parlay their experiences into an income generating sub-industry. There's a sub-industry, guys. There's self-help guides, independent websites dedicated to helping guys find these brides. Also, one gentleman who met his wife on an AFA tour, wrote a guidebook, started his own tour company, and is now doing boutique romance tours where he's actually performing more of a matchmaker role instead of simply facilitating the meeting of opportunities. And so some of these guys decided to kind of latch on to this business and have created this little sub-industry. Also giving promotional seminars. And the book thing is, and independent website thing is very, very common. All right, but using an affiliate-based model allows, as I pointed out, AFA to outsource risk and blame for scams and still make a large profit. How do these companies market romance? So, you know, they present them as the nice guys looking for a nice traditional woman, right? So I actually listened into a phone call. On Mondays, they have a weekly phone call where guys call in to ask questions, and Bob was doing the answers for that week. And these are the kinds of discourses that the company uses when trying to sell this tour to new potential clients. In Ukraine, there are 14,000 profiles. It's about 11,000 in the Philippines and maybe 7 in Colombia. If one woman doesn't like you, then there's always another bus coming around the corner. So implying that there's just a plethora of women there who are single and just waiting for an American guy, right? And he says, we are in charge over there. The game is rigged for us over there. So this idea that love and dating and courtship are a game, and that men have the advantage when they go abroad, unlike in America, where men feel that women have the advantage in heterosexual dating relationships. And finally, they talk about this discourse of being the nice guy. We are nice guys. We're stable. We have jobs. We have places to live, and we know how to treat a lady. And this is how they explain why these women would be interested in an older man, right? I can provide them with a great life, financial stability, unlike the local men in their dating markets, right? So Bob, as well as many other men's discussion of local men in Ukraine, Colombia, and the Philippines, often utilize similar discourses. They're based out of long-standing hierarchies of masculinity that both hyper-masculinize and effeminize non-Western men in various contexts. So this is a stereotypical picture of Ukrainian guys, right, hanging out, drinking vodka in the snow. And that is the hyper-masculine kind of discourse that surrounds Ukrainian men as well as Colombian men and Filipino men is that they're alcoholics, especially in Ukraine. There's this focus that men drink, they smoke, they die early. Also that they're violent, but the most important thing is this idea of fidelity. Most women complain that local men are not faithful. And at the same time, right, this idea that they're feminized, right, they're presented as financially unstable, they can't provide for a family the way an American man can, and that they're more emotional, right, and they're more likely to be violent because of that emotion. So Bob also mentioned to me, right, women all over complain that their guys are not faithful. And once she gets pregnant, the guy often disappears. And so this idea, right, that there are a lot of single mothers who are in this industry. Also, I was going out with a nice girl named Christina. We were having dinner, and she asked me if I would ever beat her. I was shocked, but then she told me that Ukrainian guys are like that. And so a lot of the guys repeat these discourses that they hear from the agencies, as well as the women that they're dating, that local men are abusive, local men are unfaithful, they're financially unstable, and that's why, you know, women are desperately looking for these, you know, white savior American men. Bob and AFA utilized the discourse of unfaithful and abusive local men in order to reassure the American guys on tour that beautiful younger women in Ukraine or Colombia or the Philippines are actually genuinely interested in dating them, right? And not just for a green card or for money. The fear of being scammed runs rampant in this industry. And even Bob's first romance in Ukraine ended with the girl he liked asking him for money. Thus, men's fear of being scammed dominated many conversations on tour, especially in Ukraine. Here, Tim, I met on a tour in Colombia. He had been to numerous tours in Ukraine, Colombia, and he told me about Ukrainian women that he felt Colombian women were much more genuine in their interest in American men than Ukrainian women. He wrote, me and this Ukrainian woman, we go out to a nice restaurant and it must have cost $90 American, which if you really know the restaurants in town, you can go have a nice meal for 20 bucks. Well, somehow or another, they got these cards over there. Every girl has cards. It's like a credit. But it's not a credit card, it's a discount card. You know, you go to a restaurant and when you ask for the check, the waiter always looks at the girl. Do you have the card? And so he argues that women will take guys to certain restaurants and get credits for it on a card. And so he's not sure what kind of credits or what that leads to for the women, but he's convinced there's something going on there. His buddy Jim, who he met actually on a tour in Ukraine, and then they became romance tour travel buddies along the way, mentioned if you take a taxi anywhere in Ukraine and you are hard pressed to find anywhere in the city of Kiev you are hard-pressed to spend more than $12. You have to drive around the city to spend 12 bucks, but every time the girl asks you for taxi money, and she says it will be $50. And so a lot of the guys say, okay, this is a common scam that women will overcharge for taxi rides or take them to these expensive restaurants. While many men may call women's overcharging them for a taxi a scam, I consider it to be women's creative way of earning a few extra dollars while on the margins of the global economy. For this reason, I argue that international dating represents a lucrative potential income generating activity for women in the Philippines, Ukraine, and Colombia who have been pushed to the margins of the dominant labor market and are seeking to supplement their low incomes. And so this idea of dating as development, we often think of dating as being oh so innocent and sweet, and courtship as being very innocent and sweet. But in fact, dating in the romance tour industry is an income generating activity. As this gentleman who was writing a guide about the Ukraine pointed out to me, he's like, there's a learning curve here in Ukraine. You gotta come back multiple times so you can know the scams, know how to spot them, right? That's why I'm writing this book, to help guys understand this in the future. And so for that reason, I argue that this is a lot like treating. And Clement talks about treating in the early 20th century and talks about it, how it's kind of positioned between prostitution and courtship, right? There's a continuum. And treating is this idea that, you know, working class women would exchange intimate activities for treats such as going out to fancy places, new shoes, new clothes, and now women in these countries feel that this is also a potential income earning opportunity. So there are various ways a woman can earn income by just dating a foreign guy, right? She can overcharge him for taxi fare. On one website, Anastasia Date, they charge you and you can do a live chat with a woman, and oftentimes they will pay the woman to chat with you. Emails, a lot of the women potentially could earn a cut from the emails that they are sending out from the company. Now the company I followed says they don't do that, but they of course accuse other companies of doing that, right? So, also, when I was in Ukraine, I heard about a group of women called professional daters. I actually have not had the opportunity to meet one myself yet. But what they told me is when a guy comes over and absolutely no woman will agree to go out with him, the company will call up a professional dater. And they will be like, look, this guy, he can't get a date, will you come and we will pay you to go out with him. And so in that way, because obviously if the client comes and he can't get a date, he's going to be very upset. And so they bring these professional daters in to kind of placate these guys. But also, right, this is an opportunity for these women to earn some income. Also, a lot of women would earn income doing translating on dates for their friends. So a woman would be like, let me bring my friend to be your translator, and you gotta pay her, right? Gifts. I had a young woman in the Philippines. Guys would send her all sorts of electronic equipment that she called her friends. She was definitely not romantically interested in any of those guys. And I heard a lot about shopping as well. Some guys on their very first date would take women shopping, and so women would obviously be able to buy all of these wonderful things for themselves. All right, so the following quotes kind of are an example of how people earn income, right? So Riley in the Philippines told me, Bill buys me gifts because we are friends. I told him I'm not interested in him, but he still sends me gifts to the office. And meaning he would send flowers or cakes or balloons to the actual dating agency office. But in addition, he sent her a laptop and an iPhone. And in the Philippines, having a laptop and an iPhone in Davao, where I was a pretty big deal. But more importantly, once women actually migrate or get together with an American man, remittances become an important income generating activity, right? So in the Philippines, there is this expectation that the eldest child will financially support the rest of the family. And so Missy explains, I'm the eldest, I have to help take care of my parents. For me, it's my responsibility. If you're the eldest, it's your responsibility to help them. You are responsible to help them. And one guy, and a couple guys actually said this, is they say that if you marry a Filipino woman, you marry her whole family, and most of the guys on tour in the Philippines expected to be sending remittances to their wives' families. And so remittance income, as well as income from the actual courtship activities and gifts, create this whole new industry of development for these countries and women. All right, so by following Bob's journey through romance tourism, I've been able to highlight the important ways in which hierarchies of gender, race, class, and nationality facilitate the development of intimate economies across the globe. And so we have this idea that this myth of the hostile worlds, that economics and intimate love relationships are inherently hostile to each other. I would argue against that and say that intimacy actually has become an engine of development in many parts of the world. As I pointed out, Anastasia Date, one of the competitors of A Foreign Affair, according to Fortune magazine, made $110 million in 2012 alone. And of course, it's also an engine of development for women on the ground too. So it's a development for the wealthy and for the poor. And it's often ignored, but it really does facilitate both the movement of capital and people.